This is a script that I wrote several months ago, just giving my dry opinion on Exile's Reach. I scrapped the video because I wasn't really happy with it, but it was 90% done, and with Exile's Reach finally hitting live servers this week, I figured there was no harm in just sort of finishing and uploading it. If this isn't your speed, that's fine. This is not going to, replace anything. This hasn't taken much of my time. It's just there for those few who want it, so enjoy. Exile's Reach is the new optional level 1 to 10 starting experience in Shadowlands, and is offered alongside the original starting zone. In this video we're going to overview Exile's Reach, give my impression of it, and have a more general discussion about the new player experience in World of Warcraft. WoW is a repository of huge amounts of content. It is overwhelming how many zones and dungeons have been added over 15 years, and because WoW's audience gathers at the level cap, there is a necessity to develop endgame content and progress forward. Level 60 becomes level 70, with a whole new endgame. Over the span of years though, this creates a problem, because while your new content can embrace new technology and improve graphics, your old content has aged. A new player can pick up a copy of BFA and be dumped into content from a literal decade ago. And keep in mind, Cataclysm was the solution to this problem. Imagine if you're a new player whose first experience with Shadowlands is 2004's Mulgore. It'd be madness. You'd call the ACCC. You can't just keep developing content in a straight line, and so Blizzard has been fighting against this need to backtrack for most of the game's life. Cataclysm devoted huge amounts of resources to rebuild the majority of the 1 to 60 experience, before WoD threw up its hands and introduced a level boost with its purchase. Now a new player can jump straight into the content that is on the box. But that solution isn't ideal either. As veteran players, it's easy for us to get caught up in the endgame weeds. We forget that it was the world that got us invested enough to care in the first place. But with a level boost, WoW goes from being a long distance hike to a relay where an invisible ally has run the first 90% for you. You can't get invested in the world before you are thrust into an expensive intro sequence with stakes and dire consequences, all pulling at your attention while you're not even sure what your buttons do. Most recently we've seen allied races in their heritage armor as an incentive to get players engaging with old content, but have it not be the first thing they do. Like, maybe boost a character and do Zuldazar before Blood Mist Isle. Exile's Reach is the proposed solution to this, the result of over a decade of learning on Blizzard's part. Exile's Reach is, in the broad strokes, similar to other enclosed starting experiences we've seen before, such as with the Death Knight and Pandarans. What makes it different is just how deliberate and focused it is on the new player experience. The Pandaran starting zone makes motions towards a new player experience, but it needs to set up a new race, a new cast of characters, introduce their relationship to the Alliance and Horde, all while telling a satisfying story on its own merits. And they do a pretty good job of threading that needle. But while this is a zone that could be a new player's opening moments with WoW, its focus is on a story for existing players that is beyond the borders of this weird turtle. Exile's Reach couldn't be further from that. It says, we don't have time for any of that garbage. New players will be here. Do you know how complex this fucking game is? How much shit I need to teach them? You want a story? You want deep lore? Look, ogres are doing necromancy on a dragon. Can't have that. Go kick their ass. There are no lasting ramifications on Exile's Reach. Grosh doesn't turn up and shake your hand. The story is simple enough and flexible enough that time and money can be spent on teaching the game. And money was absolutely spent on this thing. Because this is a unified experience aimed at new players, a huge portion of WoW's player base will do this island. It may end up being some of the most used content WoW ever has, up there with Orgrimmar and Stormwind. WoW has had so many different entry points for new players. Each race has a unique starting zone, and for 7 odd years now, new customers could boost a character and have their first experience with the game in over half a dozen different permutations. Someone's first experience with WoW was the Demon Hunter starting zone. Like, when you stop and think about it, it's madness. WoW had no controlled first impression, but with Exile's Reach, we have that now. It is Blizzard's chance to control a player's first impression of World of Warcraft, so you can bet they put in the work. It is the most highly produced thing Blizzard has ever done for World of Warcraft, not just in the obvious ways, but in the construction of the experience. The first thing you notice is the voice acting. Every line will seemingly be voice acted, and this is even more impressive when you consider how the scenario varies based on your class. For example, the leaders of both factions have a little tutorial section with the player that introduces the concept of a rotation.
Corruption is wearing off. Cast it again! Again! A warlock can do devastating damage with proper use of corruption.
Each class has 2 rotational buttons at this point, so the focus is on the interaction between these abilities, emphasizing the importance of dots or use of certain utilities like charge. It's a positive addition because within 10 minutes of booting up the game, you have been primed on the idea of a rotation, even if it is an extremely simple one. This is what I mean when I talk about a focus on the new player experience. All pretense of story takes a break for a moment to focus on the interaction. This is laying the foundation for the rest of the player's time in WoW. This is in contrast to players whose first moments with WoW was the opening scenario of Warlords of Draenor. Like, this sequence feels too much like a tutorial for experienced players, while also hanging new players out to dry. My god, it is so bad. What was I talking about? Right, Exile's Reach. Look at this frame. This frame is great. We can see our path through the entire zone from where you first spawn. It does this without being visually noisy though. There is a clarity to this frame. This frame is what you see on the character select screen. This whole zone would have needed to have been constructed with an eye to this moment. This is game design, baby! Along this path, the player is exposed gradually to the entire palette of WoW's questing experience. Every kind of quest you can name is represented on Exile's Reach, and by the final hub, the player is given a standard batch of WoW quests and needs no new information. This culminates with a proto-dungeon experience which is focused on imparting the idea of a dungeon. With NPC allies doing the tanking and healing, there's no pretense of challenge here. It's unremarkable in itself, but it's another very good addition to the experience, and frankly, it's a better use of this building than Highmaul was. Before we get into the world building of Exile's Reach, I want to talk about how World of Warcraft has historically communicated its world, particularly the character of the races. If the world itself is WoW's most important character, which according to Chris Metzen, it is.
The craziest thing about this franchise is that the world itself is probably the most key character. I mean, that's crazy, right?
Then the world is WoW's most important storytelling element. You can read all the wikis you want. Nothing will tell you who the Night Elves are, quite like spending a few hours in Teldrassil. The character in WoW is seeped into the groundwater. Particularly in vanilla, where straight-up narrative is so thin, you piece together an idea of the world based on loose bits of information, and how it all made you feel. I think this is part of the reason why WoW's identity seems to have shifted so much over time. No one zone can really imprint on a player, because there is so much coming at you. There is no room for subtext or interpretation in Exile's Reach. It is written with a capital W. The script is incredibly efficient in communicating the personalities of the races. Every character who appears on Exile's Reach is a stock archetype for their race. Like, there is a small point of difference between the Horde and Alliance versions of the vehicle quest. In both versions, the Gnome and Goblin of the group come up with the idea of enlarging a boar and riding it to trample the enemy. Both versions have the first shot shrink the target, and the second shot explode the target. While the Gnome fixes this problem and successfully enlarges the boar on the third attempt, the Goblin leans into this murder beam he has discovered and creates a murder gun. I mean, what would you call this? From this, we learn the Gnomes are intelligent and clinical. They refine their approach to achieve the desired outcome. Meanwhile, the Goblins are brilliant but messy. Accidents and chaos are opportunities to discover something new. There have been dissertations written about the differences between Gnomes and Goblins, and Exile's Reach portrays the difference with a simple A/B test between these two quests. However, if we do examine the two versions of Exile's Reach like this, problems emerge. World of Warcraft's original USP was this idea of faction conflict. The Alliance and Horde is World of Warcraft in popular culture. So here's a question. What is the difference between the Alliance and Horde? Like, ideologically speaking, what does each value that the other does not? This is a task that Blizzard themselves are not up for. The first line of the Exile's Reach intro cinematic tries to differentiate the two. The Horde are said to be in pursuit of freedom, honor, and glory. Fair enough, but would it be fair to say that the Alliance is disinterested in freedom, honor, or glory? Glory to the Alliance is a common phrase. The fucking wiki entry for the Alliance says they are bound by honor. But, whatever, what do the Alliance get?
A coalition of kingdoms upholding the ideals of valor and justice across Azeroth.
Okay, so there's some coded language being used here that makes it feel very paladin-y. Very... You know what, maybe let's just whip out a thesaurus and turn valor to courage, and justice to fairness. Does the Horde have no interest in courage or fairness? Some might describe a disregard for fairness as dishonourable. So yeah, we're just kind of throwing positive attributes around at random. The Horde and Alliance have no meaningful ideological differences because if either faction stood for something, that would potentially alienate players from their choice. Neither faction can be the inarguable bad guy in this forever war, so it's always just bad apples. And none of this is a new idea. But it takes time to notice this when you play the game. When you first start in Teldrassil, there's enough new stuff going on that, like, you know, of course it's different to Orcs. It goes without saying. It mightn't be until you've had time to play both factions to max level, or once you're jaded from years of cyclical conflict, that you notice how similar we all truly are. However, Exile's Reach is the point of entry now, and short enough that a new player could play through both versions of this in their first session with the game. This island reveals Blizzard's whole ass with the lack of difference between Alliance and Horde, not through the clever variations between the scenario, but by the overwhelming sameness.
Of course I did. He's my son. But more than that, he's a soldier of the Alliance. We leave no one behind.
She's my daughter. Nothing could keep me from her. And as a soldier of the Horde, she knows we leave no one behind.
Is someone there? Help! Elune, guide them to me.
A rescue party. Earth Mother, guide their path.
If you play through Tristful Glades, the experience is about the nature of the Forsaken. Playing an undead through Exile's Reach, though, that same weight is thrown behind identifying with the Horde. But the side effect of all these similarities is that rather than imbuing a strong sense of faction, they just cancel each other out. All you're really left with is a sense of World of Warcraft. And that's it really. Exile's Reach is modern World of Warcraft distilled into its purest form. It is perfectly sculpted and expensive, doling out dopamine at just the right rate. Its story is safe and predictable. It does enough to engage, but never challenge its audience. In that sense, it is the perfect representation of the product Blizzard is selling. That was aggressive. I've talked myself into disliking this. Look, WoW has changed a lot in the 13 years I've been playing it. The unspoken bias through all this is that somehow my first experience was more pure than this. Which, Classic exists now. That experience has been preserved in a more pure form than you could hope for. Exile's Reach is brilliantly made and solves a bunch of real problems. Its flaws are, in a sense, bigger than itself. It's just a fun little introduction to the world of Warcraft, and that's good enough. If you take your time and smell the roses, you will be out of there in an hour. A veteran player in a rush can do it in 40 minutes, including the dungeon. I did a run through a standard zone for comparison, and it's about the same length. N equals 1 and all, but it seems like Blizzard has got the length right here. You shouldn't feel any pressure to pick a start zone based on time efficiency. Give it a go and have fun, and if it grates on you, just remember that the best starting zone, Bilgewater Port, will still be waiting for you.